Hi class, welcome to week 5 of EMDB 101. Last week we looked at our first user experience competency, which was information architecture. This week we're going to dive into prototype engineering. I'm really excited about this one because prototypes I think can be really fun. So let's talk about what prototype engineering is. Prototype engineering is all about making a concept for some kind of digital, it doesn't have to be digital, but in this class it's going to be digital product or system, website, app, that kind of thing. In the physical world, it might be an experience like at a museum, it might be an employee onboarding experience, anything that is experiential, we can create prototypes for. But in this class, we're going to look specifically at digital prototypes. And prototype engineering in all of those cases is all about making a concept real enough in order to understand the concept fully and learn by trying to use it. And it's a way of not only understanding and learning as the designers, but understanding and learning with others. So we can bring others into prototyping in order to help us understand more about them, their problems, the thing that we're building. We can also learn from them as they try to use the prototype that we've created. So prototyping is part of the design thinking model, and we've seen this before. This is Tim Brown's design thinking model, the one where there's sort of 3 different ways of thinking that we, or 3 spaces of thinking that we go in and out of: inspiration, ideation, and implementation. You'll see I've circled prototyping here in ideation. So after we come up with brainstormed ideas, we really try to think through different ways we could solve the problem. At some point, we want to try to make some of those ways real as prototypes. So you can see that he's written on here prototype, test, and then at the very end of the ideation phase, prototype some more, test with users, test internally. So prototyping is very iterative, right? It's something that you're not going to do once per project. It's something that you're going to do continuously as you're designing something. So you're going to prototype, try it out, prototype, try it out, and you're going to do that multiple times at multiple phases of the project. And I think it's helpful to think about prototyping as kind of doing 2 things for us. It can stimulate thinking, but it can also create feedback loops. So prototyping is a really good way for us as individuals who are trying to think through a solution to force ourselves to try to think through it fully, right? To really try to sit down and think about exactly how it's going to work, exactly what it's going to be like. It's a forcing function for really thinking our ideas through, but it also creates feedback loops because we can then share those ideas with other people and they can react to them, and then we can learn from their reaction. So really just want to drive home that it's about stimulating thinking, but also creating these feedback loops where we're learning and making improvements. So it's a highly iterative process. It's a very iterative part of the user experience competency model. And what's cool about prototyping is that you can prototype at any plane of the design process. So we've looked at kind of the design process, but we've looked at like a way of thinking about a design where a design starts with a strategy, then you develop a scope, which is its features and functionalities, then you start to put it into a structure, which is its information architecture, then you develop a skeleton, which is its presentation to the world, its format, how it's organized on a screen or in a room or whatever type of design you're working with. And then the surface level is the visuals, the sensory. And you can prototype at any of these planes, all the way from strategy to surface. And the way you'll prototype, though, is different for these different planes. And so when we are practicing prototyping engineering, we have to be really aware of what's called fidelity. What fidelity is our prototype going to be in? Fidelity refers to the level of detail and realism that a prototype is going to show. So if you're trying to understand whether you've developed the right set of features, if you're down in that scope level, you don't need all of the features to look totally real in order to answer your question about, is this the right set of features? But if you want to test the surface level, it's very difficult to have a sensory experience that is not real, that you are going to learn anything from, right? Because we experience the surface level with our eyes, with our ears, with our nose. So you have to kind of present something real in order to get a true reaction to those kinds of things. Whereas in that strategy, scope, structure level, you can just kind of use pictures. You can even just talk out your ideas and get feedback on them. So fidelity refers to that level. And we have various fidelities from low to medium to high and everything in between. And with a low fidelity, we might do something like this. This is Basecamp. The company Basecamp has published this really cool book called Shape Up, or the Shape Up method, and they provide some really great instruction for any of you who want to work in user experience design for like software products on how to go through the process of, prototyping and coming up with features. And they have come up with this method, they call it breadboarding, where you're just writing out in words. I mean, they didn't invent it, but they kind of gave that name to it and gave this, presentation and shape to it, where you're just writing out in words how you kind of want something to work. So you can see in this example, they're saying, oh, we want to help people, we want to create a feature for auto pay. Rather than sketching out what that feature looks like and drawing screens, they just start by writing out what has to be in it, right? Okay, auto pay, what do you need? Well, you got to turn it on. And how do you turn it on? Well, you have to enter your credit card. We have logos. We might want to ask if you want to pay a balance now. There's going to be a submit button. So you can see they're just writing out how this is going to work. So it's very low fidelity because this is not real at all. You can't use it. All you can do is read it and talk about it. And then you might get a little bit more fidelity going where now they're starting to draw the screens and kind of show how the screens might look. They call this a fat marker sketch. Then you might get more into the medium to high fidelity where you're actually drawing out a screen for it and putting boxes on the page of what's going to go where and giving names to things and using text. And then high fidelity might bring in that surface level, might bring in the design, the visual design, the fonts, the colors. So low fidelity is a really great way to work when you want to make iterations in just a few seconds. When you just want to, think through things very, very quickly, write it out. Someone says, that's not how it works. Okay, rewrite it, right? You can do it in seconds. These higher fidelity prototypes can take days or even weeks to iterate on. If this design that we're seeing here in the top right, this mock-up with the colors and the fonts, if it turns out that that doesn't really work, to redo all of that is a lot of work. So it's slower to iterate. Low fidelity is really going to focus you on the abstract ideas. Hey, we're setting up bill, auto pay. Let's think about just the idea of that and let's just write out what needs to be in it. And then high fidelity is going to focus on concrete details. So, okay, what are the buttons that we need in that? What color are those buttons? Where does the button go? In low fidelity, you're going to tend to make prototypes that are more static, which means they're not interactive. This example of the breadboard, you can't do anything with it, right? You can maybe cross the words out and write new words, or you could cross the whole thing out and write new words, but there's no buttons to press. There's no screens that change. There's nothing interactive. It's static. And then high fidelity is going to tend to be more interactive because these digital products are interactive and we want them to come across as real, which high fidelity should be the highest level of detail and the most real feeling. Then you need to be able to use it. You need to be able to press the button and see where it goes. And then low fidelity is really more about thinking through an idea, and high fidelity is more about testing the effectiveness, putting something really real feeling out into the world and getting feedback and understanding if it's working and if people can use it. So low fidelity, and then mid fidelity is kind of a mix of somewhere in the middle, and then high fidelity. So the fidelity often is going to match the surface, the plane that you're thinking or testing at. So if you're just thinking about strategy, you're probably going to be in low fidelity world. As you move up into these planes and you get toward the surface, you're going to probably need higher and higher fidelity because, again, it's harder to demonstrate a skeleton or a surface with something that's not very real. Those are very tangible things, so they just invite more realness in the prototyping as we're working on the prototypes for those. So you're going to read an article about prototyping methods this week, and what I want you to get from that is this focus on just the prototype you're going to make is going to depend on what it is you want to know and who you want to know it from. If you are trying to just think through an idea with your team, then just writing out an idea in words is a good way to prototype it because your team doesn't need to be all caught up on what you're doing. They have the context they need. And a good example here is that you're going to be working on a portfolio website. You've worked on it last week and you're going to be working on it for the next couple weeks. What's the most important thing about your portfolio website? It's probably the messaging and the content, right? Is the messaging and the content compelling enough? If you send your resume to a hiring manager and they go to your website, they're not going to want to know that your buttons are all in a really good location. They want to know who you are, if you're a good fit. Have you done this kind of work before? So the messaging and the content is the really, really important part. So when we're prototyping a portfolio website, we want to focus on thinking through and trying out and getting feedback on the messaging and the content, most importantly. And then the other elements, the colors, the fonts, those are important too, but we can add those in after we have this really solid foundation of messaging and content that's really going to work for us. Whereas let's say you're making like an alarm clock app for your phone. We don't really need to know if the messaging or the content is compelling. We know that people use alarm clocks. It's more about the way you use it. What does the alarm sound like? What does the UI look like? Does it have buttons? How do you set it up? These are the questions that we're more interested in. We're not questioning whether, an alarm clock app is useful. We know they're useful. So we're going to focus on a different aspect of it. And that's going to inform the type of prototype that we use. So we might want a more higher fidelity prototype here that considers more the structure, the sensory, the sound, the visuals, that sort of thing. So in the next section, I want to talk about how you're going to specifically work on prototyping your website for your assignment this week. I'll see you there.